It's amazing how the consequences of a single telephone call can be life-changing. How the trembling of a rotary dial and the words that follow can split your entire existence into a clean before and after, like cracking an egg against the edge of a counter. In my case, it happened twice, more than a decade apart. The first call devastated my hopes, my dreams, and every ambition I'd carefully stacked like textbooks on a shelf. But it also gave me a treasure I wouldn't trade for anything on this earth. The second call, well, that one was different. You'll have to stay with me to understand. But both calls, in their own way, were gifts. I just didn't know it at the time. To understand what happened, you need to understand who I was in the summer of 1971, and more importantly, who I wasn't. I was 18 years old, 5'6" on a good day with thick-soled shoes, 132 pounds after a heavy meal. I wore glasses that sat too wide on my narrow face, the kind with thick brown frames that made me look like a startled owl. My skin was still losing its long war against acne, and my hair, brown, thin, unremarkable, sat flat against my skull no matter what I did to it. If you'd passed me on the street, your eyes would have slid right over me like I was a mailbox. I was, in the vocabulary of 1971, a complete nerd, or whatever the equivalent was before anyone had invented that word properly. I read science fiction paperbacks during lunch. I could recite the periodic table from memory, but couldn't hold a conversation with a girl without my throat closing up like a fist. I'd participated in cross-country and track, badly, as a distance runner. Not because I was fast, but because distance running required no coordination, no hand-eye skills, and no teammates depending on you to not embarrass them. You just ran until your lungs burned, and then you ran some more. I was good at endurance. I was terrible at everything else. I graduated from high school that June without ever having been on a date. Not a single one, no prom, no homecoming. No stolen kiss behind the gym. Nothing. And then there was Brian. Brian Gallagher was everything I was not. Tall, 6'1" by junior year, with the kind of lean, effortless build that made varsity coaches follow him down hallways. He had dark hair that fell perfectly across his forehead, a jawline that could cut glass, and a smile that made girls lose their train of thought mid-sentence. He was a three-sport athlete. He'd had a string of girlfriends since sophomore year, each one prettier than the last, and he'd left a trail of broken hearts behind him like confetti at a parade. We'd been best friends since 4th grade. People never understood it, the golden boy and the owl. But friendships forged at 9 years old don't answer to logic. We'd built model rockets in his garage, traded comic books on rainy Saturdays, suffered through algebra together. Brian was loyal in the way that mattered. He never once treated me like a sidekick or a charity case. To him, I was just Pete, his buddy, the smart one who helped him pass chemistry and listened to his girl problems without judgment. And he was Brian, the one who made sure nobody messed with me and who could talk his way into anything. We'd graduated together that June and were about a week and a half from leaving for our respective colleges. The summer had that bittersweet, ticking clock feeling, everything golden and temporary, like the last hour of sunlight before it drops behind the trees. Our town sat on the outer edge of the Philadelphia suburbs, a place that had once been a sleepy market center for the surrounding farms but had been slowly swallowed by subdivisions and strip malls. You could still see the old bones of it, the stone walls along country roads, the grain elevator downtown, the family plots in the churchyard with dates going back to the Revolution. But the new bones were taking over. Split-level houses, shopping plazas, the drive-in theater out on Route 30. Vietnam was on the TV every night, but out here in the suburbs, the war felt like something happening on another planet. The counterculture had come and mostly gone, leaving behind little more than longer hair on some of the older kids, and a general sense that the adults were anxious about something they couldn't quite name. My family was solidly ordinary. My father worked for a manufacturing company. My mother kept the books for a small business and kept the house with the kind of fierce efficiency that left no crumb unaccounted for and no bed unmade. I had 2 younger brothers, both still in high school, both more socially functional than I was, which wasn't saying much. And there was my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived with us in the back bedroom. She'd been there since before I was born. My grandfather had died before my parents even met. She was slowing down now, a series of small strokes chipping away at her, but she was still sharp enough to beat me at cards and wise enough to keep her opinions about my social life to herself. That was the world. That was me. And then Brian called. It was a Wednesday afternoon in August. The phone rang and I picked it up, expecting nothing in particular. "Pete, I need you." Those 3 words from Brian usually meant he wanted help moving furniture or needed me to cover for him about something. This time it was neither. "Grandmom's got 2 of her great nieces visiting from Ireland," he said. "They've been working the Jersey Shore for the summer and they're heading home soon. She wants us to take them out dinner and a movie, show them a good time, give them a night with people their own age. She's paying for everything." I processed this. "Us? There's 2 of them, Pete. I need a wingman. You need a body to fill a seat. I need my best friend to help me entertain 2 nice girls from the old country." Grandmom asked specifically. "Come on, Italian place downtown. A movie after. It's one evening." Brian's maternal grandparents, grandmom and grandpop, as even I called them though they were no relation to me, had emigrated from Ireland after the First World War and settled in our town. They'd stayed connected to their family back home, visiting once or twice over the decades. These great-nieces had apparently come to America for a summer work program on the Jersey Shore and were spending their final week visiting the American branch of the family. You don't tell your best friend no in these circumstances. You just don't. So I asked where and what time. Brian picked me up in his car, a 1967 Chevelle, midnight blue, his pride and joy, and we drove to Grandmom's house. The girls were waiting on the porch. They were introduced to us as Maeve and Bridget. Maeve was the older one, 22. She was reasonably attractive, dark hair, a quick smile, the kind of girl you'd notice at a party without necessarily remembering the next day. A 7 on a good day, maybe. And then there was Bridget. Bridget was 21. She was at least an inch taller than I was, even in the flat sandals she was wearing. She was, and I'm going to be honest here because this story demands honesty, a big girl. Not fat exactly, but built in a way that was almost triangular. Narrow shoulders, a small chest, a soft belly that pressed against her blouse, heavy, wide hips, thick thighs. If you'd been casting a movie, you wouldn't have put her in the romantic lead. But then you saw her hair, a cascade of red so vivid it looked like it had been lit from inside, and her eyes, green as sea glass, sharp and alive and full of something I couldn't name. When she smiled at me on that porch, it was the kind of smile that actually reached her eyes. Not polite, not forced. Real. She was a 4 at best by the cruel mathematics of 18-year-old boys. But those eyes, that hair, something about the way she stood, feet planted, unapologetic about the space she occupied. Needless to say, Brian got Maeve. I got Bridget. This surprised absolutely no one. She and I climbed into the back seat of Brian's Chevelle. Maeve joined Brian up front. The leather was warm from sitting in the sun and stuck to the backs of my legs below my shorts. Bridget settled in beside me, and I caught a faint scent, something floral, layered over the clean smell of soap. She turned to me and said, "So, Peter, Brian tells me you're the clever one." Her accent hit me like a song I'd never heard before, soft and lilting, turning my name into something that sounded almost musical. I mumbled something about Brian being generous with his descriptions, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, warm and sudden, that crinkled the corners of those green eyes. We headed to the Italian restaurant downtown, the only thing remotely close to fine dining our little town offered. Red checkered tablecloths, candles in wine bottles, a jukebox in the corner playing Dean Martin. Brian and Maeve fell into easy conversation immediately, the 2 attractive ones magnetically drawn together the way attractive people always are. That left Bridget and me. I expected awkwardness. I expected the special silence that descends when 2 people with nothing in common are forced to share a table. Instead, Bridget asked me questions about my classes, about what I planned to study, about the town, about America. She listened like the answers actually mattered. When I told her I was going to study engineering, her eyebrows went up and she said, "A builder, I like that. The world needs more people who make things and fewer who just talk about making things." She told me about Ireland, the village she came from, the green hills, the rain that never seemed to stop, the way the sea looked in winter when the storms came in. She talked about her family carefully, the way you describe a house with a cracked foundation, mentioning the rooms but not the damage. Her father was strict, she said. Her mother was kind. She had brothers and sisters. She left it at that, and I didn't push. By the time the pasta was cleared, I had forgotten she was a 4. I had forgotten the rating system entirely. I was just talking to a person, a warm, funny, curious person, and my throat hadn't closed up once. Our local movie theater was showing a Disney animated feature, which got a unanimous thumbs down. But the drive-in out on Route 30 had just started showing Summer of 42, which interested the girls. So we decided to head there after dinner. At Maeve's request, we stopped at the beer outlet. She went in, she was 22, and looked it, and came out with 2 six-packs. Neither Brian nor I had much experience with alcohol. I had none, really. My parents were teetotalers. Brian's family had a history of alcoholism on his grandfather's side, and his parents had strongly discouraged him from starting down that path. But we were 18, it was August, and 2 Irish girls were handing us cold beers with conspiratorial smiles. We took them. We got to the drive-in just as the sky was darkening from blue to purple. The lot was surprisingly crowded for a weekday. Brian parked out on the edge, away from the other cars, and we went off to buy popcorn for the girls. When we got settled, the screen flickered to life. The August heat was oppressive, thick, and damp, the kind that sits on your chest. We cracked the beers and drank them fast, wanting to finish them while they were still cool enough to enjoy. 2 beers for me was 2 beers more than I'd had in my entire life. The warmth hit my bloodstream like a slow wave, loosening something in my chest and softening the edges of my anxiety. That turned out to be a very bad idea, but I didn't know that yet. Maeve slid across the front bench seat toward Brian. Bridget slid across the back seat toward me. Her hip pressed against mine, her shoulder warm against my arm, and for the first time in my life I felt the actual physical presence of a girl, not as an abstract concept from a health class textbook, but as heat and weight and softness against my body. My heart was hammering. Something stirred below my belt that I was suddenly, mortifyingly conscious of. Brian was experienced. This was obvious. Within 15 minutes of the opening credits, he and Maeve were necking in the front seat. Clothing loosened. Breathing changed. Heavy sounds filtered back to us through the gap between the headrests. Bridget and I looked at each other. The light from the screen played across her face, painting her cheekbones in shifting blue and white. She bit her lower lip. Then she snuggled closer, and I put my arm around her shoulder, and something inside me that had been wound tight for 18 years began, very slowly, to uncoil. What happened next? I won't pretend it was graceful or skilled or anything like the scenes in the movies playing 50 feet in front of us. I was running on instinct and biology and 2 beers and 18 years of accumulated loneliness. I'd paid attention in health class. I'd explored the forbidden pages of Playboy and Penthouse with the academic rigor I applied to everything. I had a bookish understanding of how to touch a woman. But understanding and doing are 2 entirely different countries, connected by a very narrow and terrifying bridge. I kissed her. She kissed me back, enthusiastically, urgently, wrapping her arms around me and pulling me close. Her tongue found mine, and we stayed like that, tangled together in the back seat, while the movie played on unwatched and the August heat made us both slick with sweat. Things progressed. I'll leave the details where they belong in the merciful dark of that back seat. I'll say only that what happened between us was unplanned, unprepared for, and ultimately unprotected. Brian had come equipped, Boy Scout motto and all. I hadn't even considered the possibility. Why would I? Nothing like this had ever happened to me. Nothing like this had ever seemed remotely possible, and then it was over, and the reality of what we'd done landed on both of us like a physical weight. Her eyes were wide. She cried softly, and I apologized, fumbling for the tissue box on the rear shelf. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "If I'd known, I would have been more careful." "You deserve to have your first time with someone you truly cared for, not some guy you just met." She looked at me with those green eyes, wet now, shining in the screen's flickering light, and something shifted in her expression. The tears slowed. "I couldn't have asked for a better first experience," she said quietly. "You were gentle and kind. I hope every man who comes after you treats me half as well." We got ourselves back in order, slid apart. watched the rest of the movie with our arms wrapped around each other, saying nothing, breathing in time with each other while Jennifer O'Neill walked across the screen in a world far removed from our own. When we pulled up to Grandmom's house, I slid out and helped Bridget from the car. She leaned over and kissed me gently on the cheek. Her lips were cool against my flushed skin. She whispered in my ear, "Thank you, Peter. You're the first man who ever paid attention to me like that. I'm not sorry. Don't you be sorry either." Then she ran into the house, her red hair catching the porch light for one bright instant before the door closed behind her. Brian dropped me home. We talked about the evening the way 18-year-old boys do, in broad strokes and exaggeration, with a lot left out. A pleasant memory, we agreed. A good story. Nothing more. A week and a half later, we both left for college. I packed my suitcase, hugged my parents, waved goodbye to my brothers and my grandmother, and drove away toward a future I thought I had completely planned out. I didn't give that evening much more thought. I filed it away in the drawer marked before real life begins and closed it. But some drawers don't stay closed, and some consequences don't announce themselves for months. I'd learned that soon enough. College hit me like a freight train. I'd glided through high school without breaking a sweat. Even AP Calculus and Advanced Physics had felt like warm-up exercises. But the engineering program at Penn State was a different animal entirely. Relentless, unforgiving, designed to separate the serious from the tourists within the first 8 weeks. I spent my weekdays buried in problem sets that made high school look like finger painting, and my weekends buried even deeper. My social life didn't improve either. My roommate was a 6'2" fraternity pledge named Greg who treated our dorm room like a revolving door motel. Every Friday and Saturday night, some new girl would appear, and I'd find myself exiled to the common room lounge, trying to sleep on a vinyl couch that smelled like stale beer and regret, while the bedsprings sang their terrible song through the cinder block wall. After 6 weeks of this, I finally snapped and told him the arrangement had to change. We worked out a deal. He'd either take his entertainment elsewhere or have his guest gone by midnight. We both agreed to swap roommates next semester. We were not, as they say, compatible. Despite the chaos, I pulled decent grades, better than expected actually. By mid-December, I was home for Christmas break, feeling cautiously optimistic about my future for the first time since graduation. That optimism lasted exactly 12 days. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a week into January. My parents were at work, my brothers were at school, my grandmother was napping in her room. I was upstairs packing for the drive back to campus when the doorbell rang. I came down the stairs, opened the front door, and the entire trajectory of my life changed. Bridget stood on the porch, same red hair. Same green eyes, but something was different, a heaviness around her face, a tension in the way she held herself. A small suitcase sat beside her feet. Behind her, a taxi was backing out of the driveway. My mother had successfully drilled manners into me, even if her lessons on morality hadn't quite taken hold in certain departments. I invited her in, carried the suitcase to the living room, offered her a seat. "I didn't expect to see you again," I said, trying to sound casual while my stomach did something complicated. "Are you visiting Grandmom and Grandpop for the holidays?" "No." She looked straight at me. Her hands were clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. "I'm here to see you. We're going to have a baby." 3 seconds of absolute silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. A car passed on the street outside. The furnace clicked on in the basement. "Are you sure?" I said. She nodded. 4.5 months. It happened at the drive-in. And then, God help me, I asked the worst possible question a man can ask in this situation. "Are you sure it's mine?" Her eyes went from nervous to volcanic in half a heartbeat. "You are the only man who has ever touched me," she said, her voice shaking with fury. "Whose else would it be?" That was the moment my world crumbled. Every plan, every ambition, every carefully stacked textbook of my future knocked off the shelf and scattered across the floor. We talked for an hour before my father came home. The story she told me was worse than I could have imagined. After returning to Ireland, Bridget had realized something was wrong within weeks. She'd avoided dealing with it as long as she could. Denial is powerful medicine, but eventually she had no choice. She told her mother, who was horrified. Her mother told her father. Her father was a man named Thomas Murphy, rigid, domineering, proud as a peacock, and twice as vicious when cornered. He'd thrown Bridget out of the house, called her a whore, a slut, a tramp, told her never to come back, her own father casting her into the street like garbage because she'd embarrassed him in front of the village. Her mother, terrified of her husband but desperate to help her daughter, had sent Bridget to an aunt in Dublin. Aunt Mary was a remarkable woman. She'd been a nanny for a wealthy widower, fallen in love with him, married him, raised his children, and borne him several more. He'd died recently, leaving her wealthy in her own right. Mary had taken Bridget in, contacted Brian's grandparents for my information, and purchased Bridget's ticket to America. So here she was, pregnant, disowned, alone in a foreign country, sitting in my parents' living room with one suitcase and nowhere else to go. My father found us there when he walked through the door. His expression shifted from confusion to surprise to careful blankness as I introduced Bridget and her Irish accent registered. I didn't make him wait. "Dad, Bridget is pregnant. It's mine. It happened last summer at the drive-in." I watched his jaw tighten. "Her family threw her out. Her aunt sent her here to find me." I took a breath. "I want to marry her," Bridget gasped. We hadn't discussed this, not even close. My father sat very still for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Pretty damn stupid of you, son." Another pause. "What exactly are you planning to support a wife and baby with? You've got no degree, no skills, and no money." He was right about all of it, but he didn't say no. My mother's reaction when she arrived home was considerably less measured. She was appalled. She told me I'd ruined my life, embarrassed the family, and was a monumental disappointment. She said every word of it with Bridget sitting right there, absorbing each syllable like a blow. The acid in my mother's voice could have stripped paint off the walls, but my father's quiet question, "What are you going to do about it?" was the only one that mattered. And I'd already answered it. We were married by a kindly judge the following week. No church. The local Catholic parish wouldn't perform the ceremony since I refused to convert, and that was that. My parents attended. Nobody threw rice. Nobody cried tears of joy. We moved into the finished half of my parents' basement with a second-hand bedroom set I'd bought for $40. My father's sister offered us her mountain cabin in the Poconos for 3 days, and my parents lent us a car. Those 3 days were the first time Bridget and I were truly alone together since the back seat of Brian's Chevelle. We spent most of that time learning each other, carefully, awkwardly, then with growing confidence, and eventually with something approaching abandon. I discovered that my new wife was an astonishingly passionate woman. She was generous and eager and vocal in ways that left me breathless. On the second night, lying in tangled sheets with the mountain silence pressing against the windows, Bridget told me she loved me. I wanted to say it back. The words sat right there on my tongue like a coin I couldn't quite push through the slot. But something held them. Fear, maybe, or the nagging sense that I'd been forced into this life rather than choosing it. So I kissed her forehead and pulled her closer, and she let the silence stand without pressing me. She was disappointed. I could feel it in the way her body stiffened for just a moment before she relaxed against me. But she didn't say a word about it. Not then, not for months. We fell into a rhythm. I found work at the local hospital as an orderly, lousy pay, but the health insurance was excellent, and I could take the bus. I left the house at 6 every morning, worked until 3:30, then ran the 5 miles home to save half the bus fare. Bridget, who couldn't legally work, threw herself into the house like a woman possessed. She cooked, cleaned, did laundry, tended to my ailing grandmother. She was waging a one-woman campaign to prove her worth to my family, and slowly, very slowly, it was working. My father warmed to her first. My grandmother became her closest ally, the two of them spending hours together while I was at work. My brothers accepted her with the indifferent shrug of teenage boys who had their own lives to worry about. My mother remained an iceberg. Every other week, Bridget wrote letters to her parents in Ireland. She told them about our marriage, the pregnancy, the small details of our life. She never received a single reply. After Bridget stopped being able to write, the pregnancy making her too exhausted by evening, I took over. Quarterly letters with photographs, updates, little notes. I sent them to both her parents and to Aunt Mary. Nothing came back, not once. She cried about it sometimes, late at night in our basement bedroom where no one else could hear. But every morning she put on a brave face and kept going. I admired her for that more than I could express. As her belly grew, I began to feel something shifting inside me, a warmth I hadn't expected, a protectiveness that went beyond duty. But the words still wouldn't come. When she told me late one night, fiercely and with tears in her eyes, that she needed me to understand how important I was to her, I held her tight and said nothing. My silence was becoming its own kind of cruelty, and I knew it, and I still couldn't fix it. That was my fatal flaw. I could solve differential equations in my sleep, but I couldn't say 3 words to the woman carrying my child. I would come to regret that silence for the rest of my life. Babies never come during business hours. Ours was no exception. It was 1:00 a.m. when Bridget shook me awake. Her face was pale, her nightgown soaked. "My water broke," she whispered. "Contractions are 5 minutes apart." I moved on autopilot, woke my father, got the car keys, called the doctor's answering service. Drove to the hospital with Bridget gripping my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. At the emergency room, they put her on a gurney and wheeled her toward labor and delivery. Just before she disappeared through the double doors, she reached out and grabbed my hand one last time. "I love you," she said. And something broke open inside me, something that had been locked tight since the day she appeared on my doorstep. I looked at her, at those green eyes I'd first seen in the porch light at Grandmom's house, and I said, "I love you too." I meant it. God, I meant it. She smiled, that real smile, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I've known that for a long time," she said. Then they wheeled her through the doors and she was gone. I sat in the waiting room. The ward clerk typed at her station. The fluorescent lights hummed. I realized I was scheduled to work that morning, so I went downstairs to leave a note for my supervisor. I was gone maybe 10 minutes. When I stepped off the elevator, the hallway had erupted. Alarms, running footsteps. A voice on the overhead calling a code in labor and delivery. Doctors and nurses stampeded past me, nearly knocking me flat. I walked to the clerk's station. "What happened?" She didn't look up. "The woman in labor coded. The team is trying to save her and the baby." Whatever sound I made caused her to glance up. The color drained from her face as she realized who I was. I lunged for the doors. A nurse caught me, both hands on my chest. "You can't go in there." "That's my wife. Sit down. You'll only be in the way." Her voice was firm, but her eyes were terrified. "Let us try to save them." I sat. I have no idea how long. Time does strange things when the person you love is dying behind a set of doors you can't open. It could have been 20 minutes. It could have been 3 hours. I learned later it was just over 60 minutes. The obstetrician had performed an emergency C-section within seconds of the code, pulling our daughter free before turning back to fight for Bridget's life. They fought hard. An entire team of doctors and nurses, working desperately on a 19-year-old girl from Ireland who had done nothing wrong except fall in love with a boy too stupid to love her back in time. They lost. The doctor who came through those doors didn't need to say a word. I saw it in his face, the exhaustion, the defeat, the particular kind of grief that medical professionals carry when the outcome is the worst one. "Mr. Morton," he said, "you have a beautiful little girl. Your wife, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could." I hit the floor. I don't remember falling. I remember the sound, a screaming that filled the hallway, raw and animal and endless, and then the shock of realizing it was coming from me. A nurse helped me up eventually. She asked if I wanted to spend some time with my wife and daughter. She led me into the room where Bridget lay on a gurney, covered to her chin by a white blanket. She looked like she was sleeping. She looked peaceful and young and impossibly still. The nurse placed my daughter in my arms, a tiny sleeping thing with a cap of red hair and skin so pale it was almost translucent. Her mother's coloring. Her mother's face in miniature. I sat between them for 45 minutes, my daughter in my lap, my wife's hand in mine. The tears fell so steadily that the blanket wrapped around my baby was soaked through by the time my parents arrived. Before they took Bridget away, I leaned over and kissed her one last time. I told her I loved her. I told her I would raise our daughter to be the kind of woman who would make her proud. I promised her that Maggie, because that's what Bridget had wanted to name a girl, Margaret Mary, after her mother and the aunts who'd saved her, called Maggie for short, that Maggie would know how much her mother had wanted her and loved her. I'd said, "I love you," exactly once while she was alive to hear it. Once. My parents drove me home as the sun was coming up. The world outside the car window looked exactly the same as it had the day before, same houses, same trees, same winter sky, but nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. I was 18 years old. I was a father. I was a widower. And I had a daughter waiting in a hospital nursery who needed me to figure out how to keep going. So that's what I did, not because I was brave. Not because I was strong. Because there was a tiny red-headed girl who had no one else. And because I'd made a promise to a woman I'd loved too late, over her still warm hand, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and grief. The autopsy report arrived 4 days after Bridget died. A congenital aneurysm in her aorta, a ticking bomb she'd been carrying since birth, invisible and silent, waiting for the stress of delivery to set it off. The doctor who explained it to me was gentle about it, but the conclusion was blunt. Once it ruptured, nothing could have saved her. Not if every surgeon in Philadelphia had been standing in that room. I don't know if that was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. There was one task I had to complete before the funeral, and I'd been dreading it since the moment the doctor told me she was gone. I had to call Ireland. My father arranged the international connection. He stood close enough to hear in case I fell apart. The phone rang 3 times before a man's voice answered. Hello. Good evening, is this the Murphy residence? It is. Is this Mr. Murphy? It is. A pause, then irritation. Who is this and what do you want? Mr. Murphy, this is Peter Morton. I'm your daughter Bridget's husband. The line went quiet for 2 seconds. Then his voice came back, and it was like being hit with a bucket of ice water. Have you tired of the whore already? We won't be taking her back even if you are. Something inside me snapped. Not slowly, not gradually. It just broke clean and sharp like a bone. Your daughter is dead. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. She died 2 days ago giving birth to your grandchild. I'm calling to ask if you want us to delay the funeral so your family can attend. Silence. I could hear him breathing. My father had moved close enough to the receiver that he could hear every word. I watched the color climb his neck like a thermometer. Then Thomas Murphy spoke again, and every word was a knife. That trollop is no daughter of mine, and her spawn is none of my concern. Do with her corpse what you will. We'll not be worrying about her or her funeral. In the background, faint but unmistakable, a woman began to scream. Bridget's mother. She'd been listening. The line went dead. I stood there holding the receiver, listening to the dial tone, feeling nothing at all. My father gently took the phone from my hand and hung it up. His face was a color I'd never seen before, dark red, almost purple, the veins in his temples standing out like cords. I have never in my life, before or since, seen my father that angry. If Thomas Murphy had been standing in our kitchen at that moment, I believe my father would have killed him with his bare hands. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me and held on tight. We'll take care of your wife, he said, his voice rough and unsteady. And we'll help you take care of your daughter. She's ours now, all of ours. We stood like that for a long time, the two of us, in the kitchen where Bridget had cooked dinner just a week before. We buried Bridget in the family plot. After what her father had said, I wanted her to rest with people who had actually treated her like family, even if only for a few short months. The turnout surprised me. Brian drove 6 hours from college during exam week, bringing his girlfriend. Half the orderlies from my shift showed up with their wives. And then there was Father O'Reilly, the priest at the Catholic church Bridget had been attending. He was an Irish immigrant himself, early 40s, with a weathered face and kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He'd noticed Bridget's accent, taken her under his wing, treated her with warmth and dignity despite her marriage outside the faith. Several of his parishioners came too, women from the church functions where Bridget had quietly made friends while I was at work, connections I hadn't even known about. It hit me, standing at that graveside, how much of a life Bridget had built in the few months she'd had. How many people she'd touched. How much I'd missed while I was busy running home from the hospital and falling asleep in the basement. A week later, a letter arrived from Aunt Mary in Dublin. Long, handwritten, blotted with tears in places. She told me how sorry she was. She reminded me how much Bridget had loved me. And she asked me to keep writing to her and to Bridget's parents, not for Thomas Murphy's sake. For the sake of the mother who'd been screaming in the background, and for the siblings who didn't yet know their sister was gone. I promised I would. And I kept that promise every quarter for years. Photos of Maggie, updates on her milestones, little notes from Maggie herself once she was old enough to hold a crayon. Not once did anyone write back. I don't know how single parents do it by choice. I truly don't. For the first month of Maggie's life, I was the walking dead. She slept in 2-hour stretches maximum. Every time she woke, I woke changing, feeding, rocking, pacing the basement floor at 3 a.m. with a tiny red-haired creature screaming into my shoulder while I tried not to collapse. I slept when she slept and ate when I remembered to, which wasn't often. The men I worked with saved me. Every single orderly on my shift donated a vacation day and a sick day to my account. Combined with my own time, it gave me 3 months at home. 3 months to learn how to be a father without losing my mind entirely. It was an act of generosity so enormous that even now, decades later, I get a lump in my throat thinking about it. My mother, the same woman who'd been an iceberg to Bridget, took one look at her granddaughter and melted. Whatever wall she'd built against my wife dissolved the moment she held Maggie. She became a different person overnight. On weekends, she'd take Maggie for the whole day, giving me 6 or 8 consecutive hours of sleep, a luxury so extravagant it felt criminal. Gradually, the chaos settled into a rhythm. A brutal, grinding, relentless rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. I found a neighbor woman who babysat her own grandchildren and could take Maggie during my shifts. My parents handled the weekends I worked. Every morning, I packed our bags the night before, left the house at 5:30, took the bus to the hospital, worked until 3:30, ran the 5 miles home, picked up Maggie from the neighbor, started dinner for the family, cleaned up, and collapsed into bed. Then I did it again, and again, and again. I opened a savings account for Maggie's college fund and started putting 10% of every paycheck into it. She was going to have the education I'd given up. That was non-negotiable. On my days off, we'd visit Bridget's grave. I'd push Maggie in her stroller along the cemetery paths, talking to her about her mother while she cooed and grabbed at the air with her tiny fists. I told her everything, how her mother had been brave and kind, and how she'd loved Maggie more than anything in the world. I don't know how much a baby understands, but I kept telling her anyway. Father O'Reilly asked me to bring Maggie by the church once I was settled. Bridget had wanted her raised Catholic, and while I wasn't about to convert, I owed it to my wife to honor that wish. The father agreed to baptize Maggie and even found her a set of godparents, Ryan and Sally Wilson, a couple a few years older than me with a daughter named Chloe, just 2 months older than Maggie. It turned out Sally had known Bridget. They'd met at a church women's group and bonded over their pregnancies, occasionally sharing tea at Sally's house. I'd met the Wilsons briefly at the funeral but hadn't really registered them. Over the following months, they became something I desperately needed: friends. Their house was barely a mile from my parents', and Chloe and Maggie took to each other instantly. The kind of fierce, inseparable childhood friendship that starts with shared toys and never really ends. Sally, bless her heart, also made it her personal mission to find me a girlfriend. After the 4th or 5th disastrous setup, she finally accepted that I wasn't ready. The truth was simpler than that. After what had happened with Bridget, I couldn't imagine being with anyone else. The risk was too great. The cost was too high. 2 years after Maggie was born, my grandmother died. She'd been declining since before Bridget arrived, and the small strokes had finally accumulated into one large enough to take her. I mourned her. She'd been a quiet, steady presence my entire life. But what came after her death stunned me. My grandmother, who'd lived as simply as a sparrow, turned out to have more money than anyone realized. Her will split the assets between my mother, my brothers, and me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I'd ever had. The attorney handling the estate asked me to stay behind after the reading. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my grandmother's careful handwriting. "Dear Peter, please use these funds to obtain the college education you should have gotten. Love, Grandmom." I sat in that conference room for 10 minutes after everyone else had left, holding that letter, thinking about a woman who'd watched me sacrifice everything and had quietly planned to give some of it back. There was a state university campus half a mile from the hospital. They had an engineering program, evening and late afternoon classes, taught mostly by working professionals. With my old transcript and SAT scores, admission wasn't a problem, but it would take 7 or 8 years at 1 or 2 classes per semester. I enrolled anyway. For the next 8 years, my life was a 3-ring circus: full-time orderly, full-time father, part-time engineering student. The guys at work thought I was insane, but they swapped shifts without complaint when I needed to make a class. Every Friday afternoon, I'd stop at the bar across from the hospital to buy the gang a round, even though I hadn't touched alcohol since that August night in Brian's Chevelle. It was the least I could do for the men who kept holding me up. I finished my engineering degree just after Maggie's 10th birthday. I was 29 years old, and it felt like I'd climbed a mountain with a child on my back and my shoelaces tied together. 2 of my professors, who'd got to know my story over the years, pointed me toward an opening for assistant facilities manager at the campus where I'd studied. Better pay, more than double what the hospital gave me, and the benefits included free tuition for employees' children. I applied, got the job, and said a reluctant goodbye to the orderlies who'd been my brothers for a decade. At my graduation ceremony, my father handed me a card. Inside was a check, the entire sum of every room and board payment I'd made to my parents since Bridget and I moved into their basement. They'd saved every dollar, waiting for the day I'd need it for a house. Maggie and I found one together. A small 3-bedroom ranch on a 1/4-acre lot, 3 houses down from the Wilsons. She picked it out herself. She wanted to be within running distance of Chloe, and nothing else mattered. We moved in 30 days later. For the first time in a decade, I had a job I could be proud of, a house I owned, money in the bank, and a daughter who was healthy and happy and growing into someone extraordinary. But Maggie, who was too smart for her own good and too perceptive for mine, had started asking a question I couldn't dodge forever. "Daddy," she said one evening, sitting cross-legged on her new bedroom floor while I assembled a bookshelf. "How come all the other girls at school have mommies and I don't?" I put down the screwdriver. Looked at my daughter, 10 years old, red hair in a ponytail, green eyes exactly like Bridget's, watching me with that expression she'd inherited from her mother. The one that said, "I'm going to wait until you answer and I'll know if you're lying." "I've been too busy, sweetie," I said. "Working and school and taking care of you. There wasn't time to find someone." "But you're done with school now." "I am. So you can start looking." I took a breath. "I'll work on it, I promise." She studied me for a long moment, decided I was telling the truth, and went back to organizing her books by color. The question didn't come up again for a while, but promises have a way of sitting in the back of your mind, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment they come due. Mine would come due on a Saturday morning a year later with a phone call I never saw coming. It was a Saturday morning in August, hot already by 8 o'clock, the kind of thick summer heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Maggie was at Chloe's for a sleepover. I was in the garage pulling out the lawnmower, thinking about nothing more complicated than whether I had enough gas to finish the front and back yards when the phone rang. I jogged inside and picked it up, expecting Maggie asking me to bring over something she'd forgotten, or Sally telling me the girls were driving her crazy and to come get mine early. "Hello? Is this Peter Morton?" A woman's voice, and underneath the words, underneath the question itself, an accent I hadn't heard from a woman in over 11 years, that soft Irish lilt rising at the end of the sentence like a wave curling toward shore. My hand tightened on the receiver. "It is. Are you the Peter Morton who was married to Bridget Murphy?" The kitchen went very still. The clock on the wall ticked. A lawn mower buzzed somewhere down the street. My blood was already starting to heat. "Who is this?" "My name is Maura Murphy. I'm Bridget's youngest sister." And that's when 11 years of everything, every unanswered letter, every silence from across the ocean, every tear Bridget had cried alone in that basement bedroom while her family pretended she didn't exist, every vile word her father had spat through the phone while my wife's body was still warm, all of it detonated at once. "What the hell do you want?" I was screaming before I even knew I'd raised my voice. The words ripped out of me like something caged and feral that had been waiting for the lock to break. "Please, Mr. Morton, don't hang up. I want to apologize for how our family... In what universe do you think I want to hear from any of you?" My hand was shaking. The phone cord was wrapped around my fist so tight the plastic was cutting into my skin. Your father called my wife a trollop the day after she died. He refused to come to her funeral. None of you ever wrote back. Not one of you, not once in 11 years. What gives you the right to call this house? There was a pause. I could hear her breathing quick, unsteady, like someone trying very hard not to cry. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking, but she didn't back down. We didn't know about the letters, any of them. My father hid them from us, all of them. We found them after he died last month. That stopped me. Not completely, the rage was still there, hot and raw in my chest, but enough to crack the door open an inch. What do you mean he hid them? After he passed, we were clearing out his things. There was a box in his shed, locked. We broke it open and found, Mr. Morton, there were dozens of letters, from Bridget, from you, photos of your daughter, little notes she'd written. The envelopes were worn from being opened and closed. The photos had fingerprints on them like he'd held them over and over. Her voice broke. He read every single one, he just never let any of us see them. I leaned against the kitchen counter. The lawnmower sat abandoned in the garage. The August heat poured through the screen door. I closed my eyes and saw Thomas Murphy, a man so proud and so broken that he'd rather read his granddaughter's crayon drawings in secret, alone in a garden shed, than admit he'd been wrong. I hated him. And in that moment, standing in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear, I also pitied him, just barely, just for a second. Where are you? I asked. My voice was lower now. Controlled, barely. I'm at your train station. I was supposed to stay with your friend Brian's parents, Dick and Joyce. They'd agreed to help arrange a meeting with you, but I've been calling them since yesterday and I can't reach them. I knew exactly where Dick and Joyce were. Brian's wife had gone into labor a month early, and they'd driven to Pittsburgh to help out. They hadn't mentioned any of this to me. I'll give you 30 minutes, I said. There's a diner 2 blocks from the station. Anyone can point you to it. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Do not expect warmth from me, and my daughter stays where she is until I decide otherwise. I hung up before she could respond, grabbed my car keys. Drove to the diner with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. She was sitting at a table near the back when I walked in. 2 large suitcases were wedged beside her chair, and that detail hit me with a pang of guilt I hadn't anticipated. In my anger, I'd completely forgotten that she was stranded. No ride, no host. No one she knew in this country except a man who just screamed at her through a telephone. I looked at her and felt the ground shift slightly beneath me. She was small, 5'2" at most, slender, with narrow shoulders and delicate wrists. Her hair was the same vivid red as Bridget's, but straighter, falling past her shoulders. Her eyes were the same startling green. But the build was completely different. Where Bridget had been wide and heavy and solid, this woman was slight, almost fragile-looking. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the coloring, the cheekbones, something in the set of the jaw, but the package was entirely different. She stood when she saw me. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying. I sat down across from her. A waitress poured coffee. I wrapped my hands around the cup and looked at Maura Murphy. You have 30 minutes, I said. Make your case. She took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was steady, not because she wasn't afraid, I think, but because she'd rehearsed this. She'd been preparing for this conversation, probably for weeks. My father was a proud and rigid man. He valued his standing in our village above everything, above his wife, above his children, above his own happiness. When Bridget got pregnant, it threatened that standing. He made a terrible choice, and I believe he regretted it almost immediately. But he had no ability to take it back. Admitting he was wrong would have destroyed the only thing he had left, his pride. She paused. I said nothing. When you called to tell him Bridget had died, he was backed into a corner. He could acknowledge that she still mattered to him, or he could lash out. He chose to lash out. That choice destroyed my parents' marriage. My mother has never forgiven him. My brothers and sisters all left the house as soon as they could. I stayed to look after my mother because someone had to. And the letters? He kept them all, every one. The box was hidden under a workbench in the shed where none of us would think to look. The letters from Bridget, the letters from you, the photographs, your daughter's little drawings and notes. Some of the envelopes were nearly falling apart from how many times he'd opened them. She swallowed hard. He was reading them, Mr. Morton, over and over. For years, he just couldn't let himself respond, and he couldn't let any of us know they existed. I stared at my coffee. The surface trembled slightly, my hands, not the table. Why are you here specifically? Why you? I graduated from nursing school last year. Your hospitals have been recruiting nurses from Ireland. I've been offered a position at the hospital where you used to work. She looked directly at me. I chose that hospital because it's close to you and Maggie. My mother and my brothers and sisters asked me to come early to find you, to apologize in person, to ask if you might allow us to be part of your lives, part of Maggie's life. Tears were running down her cheeks now, quiet and steady, and she made no effort to wipe them away. She just sat there looking at me, waiting. I thought about Bridget. I thought about what she would want me to do, she who had written to her parents every other week even after they'd thrown her out like garbage. She who had asked me to keep writing even after they'd never responded. She who had loved her family despite everything they'd done to her. And I thought about her father, the man I'd despised for over a decade, sitting alone in a cold shed, reading his granddaughter's crayon letters by the light of a bare bulb, too proud and too broken to ever let anyone know. I sat there for a long time. Maura waited without pushing. I'm not ready for you to meet my daughter yet, I finally said. I need to think about it. Let me call my mother and see if she's willing to put you up for a few days. I stepped outside and dialed my parents' number. My mother listened without interrupting while I explained the situation. Then she said something that nearly knocked me over. Bring her here, Peter. Your father and I would like to talk to her, and for what it's worth, I think you should give her a chance. This was the woman who had been ice cold to Bridget for months. If she was saying this, something had shifted in her that I didn't yet understand. I went back inside, dropped a 5 on the table, picked up Moira's suitcases, and drove her to my parents' house. I didn't speak to Moira for 4 days. My parents did long conversations over kitchen table coffee that I wasn't part of. Whatever she told them, whatever they saw in her, it was enough. When my mother called me at the end of the week, she didn't suggest. She told me, let her meet Maggie, let her stay with you until she gets settled. She's a good girl, Peter, she's not her father. Dick and Joyce's situation in Pittsburgh had stretched from days into weeks. Brian's wife had complications, and his in-laws were still in Europe. My parents were about to leave on their own vacation. There was nowhere else for Moira to go. I drove to my parents' house, loaded her suitcases into my trunk for the second time, and brought her to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Clean sheets, fresh towels, the bathroom she'd share with Maggie across the corridor. You can stay here until Dick and Joyce get back or until you find a place of your own, I told her. Maggie will be home after 4. You can meet her then. I paused. I can't promise how she'll react. She might be angry. She might be happy. You need to be ready for either. Moira nodded. Thank you, Peter. It was the first time she'd used my first name. I needn't have worried about Maggie. When my daughter walked through the door that afternoon and found a slender, red-haired woman sitting at the kitchen table, she stopped for exactly 2 seconds. I introduced them. Maggie, this is your Aunt Moira. She's your mother's youngest sister. 2 seconds of silence. Then Maggie's face split into a grin so wide it nearly reached her ears, and she grabbed Moira's hand and said, Come on, I'll show you the house. Within 5 minutes, she was dragging Moira through every room, chattering at a speed that would have exhausted a court stenographer. By dinner, they were finishing each other's sentences. By bedtime, Maggie had informed me, in a tone that left no room for discussion, that Aunt Moira was staying. Dick and Joyce's stay in Pittsburgh stretched to 3 more weeks. By the time they finally returned, it didn't matter. Moira had woven herself into our daily life so thoroughly that pulling her out would have been like removing a thread from a finished tapestry, possible but destructive. She started work at the hospital. She became Maggie's emergency contact at school, her companion on doctor visits, her homework supervisor on the nights I worked late. She befriended Sally Wilson within days. Something about their shared practicality clicked immediately. She started attending Father O'Reilly's church. She cooked dinners that tasted like Bridget's but weren't quite the same, and the difference made them easier to enjoy rather than harder. We were roommates, housemates, co-parents in a functional if undefined sense. There was no physical contact between us beyond the occasional brushing past each other in the kitchen, which was slightly too narrow for 2 people to occupy without touching. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice her. She wore t-shirts and jeans around the house, and her frame, slight, compact, undeniably feminine, was not something a man could ignore indefinitely, no matter how many walls he'd built. There were mornings when she'd come out of the bathroom with wet hair and bare feet and a tank top, and I'd have to look away quickly and think about plumbing systems or structural load calculations until the heat in my face subsided. She was my sister-in-law. She was living under my roof. She was 10 years younger than I was. I confined these thoughts strictly to the privacy of my own bedroom and my own imagination, and I told myself that was where they would stay. A year passed like that, comfortable, warm, undefined. And I might have let it stay undefined forever, because that is exactly the kind of emotionally blind, terminally cautious, catastrophically clueless man that I am. If it weren't for a lecherous doctor, a barstool conversation, and an 11-year-old girl who was considerably smarter than her father. The following summer, for the first time since Maggie was born, I decided to take a real vacation. Not a day trip to the Jersey Shore, not a long weekend at my parents' house. An actual 2-week road trip, my parents' motor home, a route through Maryland, Virginia, and Tennessee. Civil War battlefields, an amusement park, the Grand Ole Opry, hiking and fishing along the way. I mapped the whole thing out on a Sunday afternoon, proud of myself for finally doing something spontaneous. Maggie was thrilled, until she asked Maura what she was most excited to see on the trip. Maura, who was folding laundry in the living room, looked up with a careful expression. "Your dad hasn't invited me, sweetie." I was in the kitchen and didn't hear this exchange. What I heard approximately 90 seconds later was my daughter storming in with the kind of righteous fury that only a 12-year-old girl can generate. "You didn't invite Aunt Maura?" "Maggie, the motorhome is small. There's no privacy. I thought she might like some time. She is part of this family." Maggie's eyes, green, blazing, so much like her mother's that it physically hurt, were locked on mine. "You don't leave family behind when you go on vacation. That's mean and hateful. If she's not going, I'm not going either." I tried to reason with her. I pointed out the sleeping arrangements, the close quarters, the lack of personal space. She didn't blink. "I don't care about any of that. She's coming or I'm staying at Chloe's for 2 weeks. Pick one." I picked the one that didn't involve my daughter hating me. I pitched the trip to Maura carefully, explaining the conditions: 1 bathroom, thin walls, no real privacy for anyone. She listened, asked for a day to check if the hospital could give her the time off, and came back with a yes. 2 weeks on the road. Campgrounds with communal showers and flush toilets. 2 nights in Walmart parking lots, parked among a half-dozen other motor homes whose owners apparently knew about this arrangement long before I did. Maura took the bed in the rear. I took the one up front. Maggie slept in the loft above the cab, claiming it was like sleeping in a treehouse. We hiked. We fished badly, all 3 of us, laughing as we failed to catch anything. We toured Gettysburg in the rain, Maggie reading every plaque out loud while Maura held an umbrella over her. We ate terrible diner food in small Virginia towns and excellent barbecue in Tennessee. At the Grand Ole Opry, Maura and Maggie danced in the aisle while I watched from my seat, clapping along, feeling something warm and unfamiliar expanding in my chest like a balloon slowly being filled. We came home sunburned, exhausted, and closer than we'd ever been. Something had shifted during those 2 weeks. Some invisible wall between roommates and family had dissolved without anyone naming it. But I didn't name it either. I just let it sit there, undefined, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. I should have known it wouldn't stay undefined much longer. A few weeks after Maggie started the new school year, I stopped by the bar across from the hospital for the Friday session with my old buddies. I hadn't been in a couple of months and wanted to catch up. When I walked in, 4 of them were laughing so hard one of them was wiping tears from his eyes. "What'd I miss?" I asked, dropping onto a stool and signaling for a round. My buddy Tommy, a big guy with a handlebar mustache and a voice that carried across any room, leaned forward with the grin of a man who'd been waiting to tell this story. "You remember Dr. Hansey?" I remembered. Every hospital employee remembered. A young physician with wandering hands and a father on the board of trustees, which meant he'd been getting away with it for years. "What about him?" "So there's this nurse, cute little thing, been here about a year. Red hair, green eyes, real slender. One of the Irish nurses from the last recruiting round." Tommy was grinning wider now. Hansy finally noticed her, walked right up to her at the nurse's station this morning, grabbed her backside, and asked when she was coming to his place for the night. The bar went quiet around me, though the others were still grinning. They'd already heard this part. She turned around and slapped him so hard you could hear it on the other side of the ward, Tommy continued. Then she said, and I'm quoting here, "If you ever touch me again, I'll have my boyfriend rip off your bits and feed them to you. Now get away from me." The entire nursing staff started clapping. I thought old Hansy was going to pass out. The table erupted in laughter again. Tommy slapped the bar. "That Nurse Mora is something else, I tell you." The laughter continued around me. I didn't hear any of it. That Nurse Mora, red hair, green eyes, slender, Irish, my Mora in my house, raising my daughter, dancing at the Grand Ole Opry. Folding laundry in my living room. My Mora had a boyfriend. The bar noise faded to a distant hum. I stared at my glass of water and felt something collapse inside my chest, a slow, sickening cave-in, like a building being demolished from the inside. She had a boyfriend. When she was with us nearly every minute she wasn't at work. How had I missed this? Who was he? And then, like a punch to the stomach that you see coming but can't dodge, the realization. This is me doing it again. This is me recognizing what I feel exactly when it's too late. Just like her sister, just like Bridget. I bought the guys their round, made some excuse about needing to get home, and drove back in silence, my hands tight on the wheel. I didn't say anything that evening. Mora was reading on the couch. Maggie was doing homework at the kitchen table. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but nothing felt the same. After dinner, Mora went to take a shower. Maggie didn't move from the table. She sat there watching me clear the dishes with those green eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "Daddy?" "Yeah, sweetie." "When are you going to keep your promise?" I stopped with a plate in each hand. "What promise?" "You promised me you'd find me a new mommy after you finished school. You graduated over 2 years ago. You haven't been on a single date." I set the plates in the sink, turned around, tried to sound casual. "The world isn't exactly full of women lining up to marry your old man, Maggie." "What about Aunt Mora?" "From what I hear, Aunt Mora has a boyfriend." What happened next is something I will remember until the day I die. My daughter's face crumbled. Not slowly, instantly, like a sandcastle hit by a wave. Her eyes went wide, then filled with tears, and then she was screaming. Not tantrum screaming, grief screaming. The sound of a child who has just been told the person she loves most is going to leave. "I don't want Aunt Moira to leave. I want her to be my mommy. You have to tell her she can't leave. She's part of our family." Mora came running down the hallway in sweatpants and a damp t-shirt, hair still wet. "What happened? What's wrong?" Maggie launched herself at Mora, wrapping both arms around her waist and burying her face in her stomach. "Please don't leave us, please don't leave us, please don't leave us." Mora looked at me over Maggie's head, completely bewildered. "Peter, what on earth is going on?" "She asked me about finding her a new mother. She suggested you." "I told her you had a boyfriend and that you'd probably want to start your own family eventually." I paused. She didn't take it well. Something changed in Mora's face. The bewilderment didn't disappear, it was joined by something else, something hot and bright and furious. "Who told you I have a boyfriend?" I told her the Dr. Hansy story. Word for word, including the threat she'd made about what her boyfriend would do to him. As I spoke, Mora's face went from pale to pink to a deep, burning red that started at her collarbone and climbed all the way to her hairline. Then she exploded. "You are the most bloody, clueless man in the entire universe." Her voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was shaking with a year's worth of patience finally reaching its end. "How in the world did my sister ever fall in love with you? That boyfriend I was talking about at work is you, you absolute fool. It's been you since before I ever set foot in this country." Maggie had gone very still against Moira's stomach. "I fell in love with you reading your letters," Mora continued, tears now streaming freely. "Every letter you wrote to people who never answered, your kindness, your patience, your love for Maggie, I read every word and I thought, this is the kind of man who deserves to be loved. I came here to meet your daughter. I stayed because I love her and because I have fallen completely, hopelessly, stupidly in love with you. I have been waiting for over a year for you to notice. You never did, not once." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "If you ever touch me again, I'll have my boyfriend rip off your bits," she repeated in a mocking version of her own voice. "I was talking about you, Peter." There is no one else. There has never been anyone else. She looked down at Maggie, who was now looking up at her with enormous, tear-streaked eyes. She kissed the top of my daughter's head. Then she turned and walked to her bedroom, closing the door behind her with a firm, definitive click. Maggie and I stood in the kitchen, staring at each other. My daughter recovered first. She always did. "You better go to her, Dad." She wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I think you have one chance to fix this, and you'd better not blow it." Sometimes my daughter is terrifyingly smart. I knocked on Mora's door, opened it without waiting. She was lying on the bed with her back to me, hands covering her face. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on her shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. "Mora." My voice was quiet, steady, clearer than it had any right to be, given that my heart was hammering hard enough to crack ribs. "You're right, I am clueless. I didn't recognize how much I loved your sister until the day she died. I said it to her once while she was alive to hear it, and I will carry that regret to my grave." I took a breath. "And I didn't recognize that I'd fallen in love with you until 3 hours ago when I sat on a bar stool and heard that you had a boyfriend and felt my whole world fall out from under me." She rolled over. Her eyes were swollen, her face blotched with tears. She looked at me without speaking. "I don't want to be your boyfriend," I said. "I want to be your husband. I want to be the father of your children. I want us to grow old together in this house and watch our grandchildren play in that yard. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know how much you're loved, because I have learned, twice now, the hard way, what happens when you wait too long to say it." She held my gaze. 5 seconds. 10. An eternity compressed into a silence that roared in my ears. "Of course I'll marry you," she whispered. "You darling, stupid, clueless man. Nothing in this world could make me happier." From the hallway came a sound I will never forget, my daughter, who had obviously been listening at the door, cheering at the top of her lungs. "I'm going to have a mommy again, and it's the mommy I wanted." I reached for Moira, pulled her into my arms, and kissed her for the first time. She tasted like salt and toothpaste and something that felt a lot like the rest of my life. We moved fast after that, not because we were impulsive, but because we'd both waited long enough. The next morning, I called in late to work. Mora called in for the first time since she'd started at the hospital. We drove to the jeweler and picked out a ring that needed resizing. 2 days later, I slipped it onto her finger in the parking lot of the jewelry store, and she held her hand up to the sunlight and laughed in a way I'd never heard from her before, free, unguarded, completely happy. We called my parents first, then Mora's mother in Ireland, who cried so hard we could barely understand her. Then Aunt Mary, whose quiet generosity more than a decade ago had set all of this in motion. Father O'Reilly married us on a Saturday afternoon in the same church where Maggie had been baptized. It was a small wedding. My family, Moira's mother and sisters who'd flown in from Ireland, Brian standing beside me as best man for the second time in my life, Maggie as maid of honor in a green dress she'd picked out herself. My hospital buddies filled 2 pews and cheered when I kissed the bride. We left Maggie with her grandmother Murphy and her aunts, the first time the Irish side of the family had held her, a moment that reduced every woman in the room to tears, and flew to Hawaii for 2 weeks. Our first night together, I discovered that Moira had never been with anyone. I also discovered that certain traits apparently run in the Murphy family. My new wife shared her sister's extraordinary sensitivity, her passion, and her seemingly inexhaustible enthusiasm for physical connection. We saw far less of Hawaii than the travel brochures recommended, but neither of us minded. When we returned, we hired an attorney to begin Moira's adoption of Maggie. Bridget would always be her first mother, the woman who gave her life to bring her into the world. But Moira would be the mother who raised her, guided her through her teenage years, held her hand through heartbreaks and triumphs, and loved her as fiercely as if she'd carried her herself. Our first son arrived 10 months after the wedding. 2 more children followed, another boy and a girl. The Murphy women are apparently very fertile. After the third, Mora and I agreed our family was complete, and I took permanent measures to ensure it stayed that way. Our house, which had once been too quiet for just Maggie and me, was now too small and too loud and too chaotic and absolutely, perfectly full. I am standing at the doors of the sanctuary, and my daughter's hand is resting in the crook of my arm. She is 23 years old. Her wedding gown is simple and elegant. She insisted on that, over Moira's gentle lobbying for something more elaborate. Her red hair is pinned up with small white flowers woven through it. Her green eyes, her mother's eyes, both her mother's eyes, are bright with tears she's refusing to let fall until after the ceremony. "Are you ready for this, Daddy?" "I am, sweetie." The organ begins. 200 people rise from their pews and turn toward us. The sound fills the sanctuary like a wave, deep, resonant, the kind of music that vibrates in your chest. We begin to walk. The aisle is longer than I remember from rehearsal. Each step carries the weight of 24 years. Every sleepless night, every letter sent into silence, every bus ride to the hospital, every evening class, every bedtime story, every scraped knee and science project and slammed door and whispered apology. All of it compressed into 60 feet of carpet and the pressure of my daughter's hand on my arm. I see them as we walk. Every face a chapter in this story. Moira is in the front row, still the beautiful, slender redhead she was the day I first saw her across a diner table with mascara running down her cheeks. Our 3 younger children sit beside her, 2 boys in suits that are already slightly rumpled, and our youngest daughter, 14, in a blue dress, trying not to cry and failing. Behind them, my parents. My father, silver-haired now but still straight-backed, still steady, still the quiet foundation everything else was built on. My mother beside him, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, the woman who took so long to warm and then burned so bright once she did. Behind them, Moira's mother, who flew in from Ireland with her other daughters and their families, filling an entire pew with red hair and green eyes and accents that turn every sentence into a song. My brothers and their families, Sally and Ryan Wilson. My old hospital buddies, older now, grayer, but still showing up when it matters. And at the altar, waiting, John, the boy Maggie met at 14, the only person she ever dated, the man who looked at my daughter the way I should have looked at Bridget from the very beginning. Beside him, his twin brother, his best man, who happens to be married to Chloe Wilson, Maggie's maid of honor. Those 4 had been inseparable since high school. Some patterns, it seems, repeat in better ways. Monsignor O'Reilly, Father O'Reilly, promoted by time and service, stands waiting in his vestments. His hair is white now, but those kind eyes still crinkle when he smiles. He baptized Maggie. He married Moira and me, and now he will marry my daughter to the love of her life. There is a rightness to that which needs no explanation. Aunt Mary is not here. She is too frail to travel now, 90-something and housebound in Dublin. But there is a videographer in the balcony, recording everything, and Moira's mother will carry that tape to her when she returns. Mary will see it. She will know that the chain of kindness she started, taking in a pregnant, disowned girl and buying her a plane ticket to America, led to this. To all of this. We reach the front of the church. I stop. Maggie turns to face me. I lift her veil. Underneath, she is smiling, that real smile, the one that crinkles the corners of her eyes, the one she inherited from a woman she never met but has known her entire life through photographs and stories and monthly visits to a quiet grave. I kiss her forehead. I place her hand in John's. He takes it gently, and I see his fingers tremble slightly, and I think, good. A man's hands should tremble when he's given something this precious. Monsignor O'Reilly begins the ceremony. The words are ancient and familiar and weighted with meaning. When he reaches the question I've been waiting for, his eyes find mine. Who gives this woman to be married? I look to Moira. She meets my gaze across the pews, steady, warm, her eyes full of tears and light, and gives me a slight nod. I speak in a firm voice, and I speak for 2 women. One who is sitting in the front row, alive and radiant and the great love of my life. And one who is not here, who has never been here, except in the red of Maggie's hair and the green of her eyes and the fierce, generous heart that beats inside her chest. Her mother's and I do. As the words leave my mouth, a beam of light breaks through the sanctuary's stained glass window and falls across the altar, illuminating the young couple in gold and rose and blue. It's just the sun, I know. Just the angle of the light at this hour of the afternoon, just physics doing what physics does. But I choose to believe it's something else. I choose to believe it's Bridget, the girl with the red hair and the green eyes who climbed into the back seat of a 1967 Chevelle on a hot August night and changed my life forever, looking down at the daughter she loved enough to die for and blessing her on the happiest day of her life. I take my seat beside Moira. She reaches over and takes my hand. Her fingers are warm and steady and sure. 2 phone calls, more than a decade apart. One shattered everything I thought my life would be. The other rebuilt it into something I never could have imagined. Both of them, in the end, were gifts. I just had to learn slowly, painfully, and nearly too late how to unwrap them.